What's good, Des Moines? Welcome to another episode of Invitation by Invictus. Today, I have Tobi Parks of XBK. But if you guys don't know who Tobi is, there is so much more to you. I mean, like, just even before we hit record, you were just busting it all out. I was just kind of like, holy shit, you're like knee deep into some stuff.
Yeah, the irony of that is I thought we were actually recording at that point too, so...
You're good. We can go back and see.
Yeah, so just pretend like it was the first time you ever heard it.
I will be shocked. So Tobi, tell us how, like, you're originally not from Des Moines, right?
No.
You grew up in St. Louis.
Just south of St. Louis,
okay.
actually. Yeah, so grew up in rural southeast Missouri in a little small town called Ironton / Arcadia Valley.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then you went to school in New York City?
No, I went to school at Webster University in St. Louis. So that's when I moved to St. Louis, even though I had always had a lot of connections to the city, even though I lived in sort of the rural areas. I played in bands and whatever, so spent tons of time there. So went to college there.
Okay.
Got my undergrad at Webster, got my graduate degree at Webster, and then moved to New York.
And then what did you do in New York?
A lot of things. So my reason for moving to New York was because I had decided that I really wanted to do music full time. When I was in St. Louis, I spent a lot of time like playing in bands and booking my bands. And at that time, my goal was to be a full-time musician. But it was hard to do that from St. Louis. And so I thought, well, I'll move to New York. I can get some session work. I can tour. I can kind of put all these little things together and be a full-time musician. Mm-hmm. So moved to New York, found out that it was a little bit more complicated than that to be a full-time musician.
True.
And so started working for an organization called In the Life, which was an educational organization that produced, at the time, the only, it wasn't quite at the time, but it was the first LGBTQ news magazine in the United States. And it was, so it was broadcast on PBS across 130 different markets.
Yeah.
And so I was the director of community affairs and marketing for them.
Oh, dope.
So did that for a year and kind of, parlayed some of my music production stuff. So I would do like some composing for the show and do some producing for the show, but then primarily did all of the like station relations and marketing and worked with a lot of the like national queer organizations. Yeah. And those affiliations with the organization. And did that for about a year. And then decided again I was going to make the run to be the full-time musician. So quit the job out of nowhere. Okay. Quit, and I was like, okay, I want to do this. And then about a month or so went by, and I was like, I like having money.
So nobody wants to be a broke ass hoe.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to find some sort of job that I don't care about.
Sure.
Like something where I can just focus on my music, and I'll go and do whatever.
The clock in, clock out job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not really the clock in, clock out kind of person, but I thought I could do it. And so I had a friend that at the time worked at Sony Music in the copyright division. Yeah. And it's, this was like 2006. And so it was sort of the dawning of the digital era. And
they started making a shift.
Yeah. And so they, iTunes had already come out, but the industry, as we all know, is a little bit slow to catch up to sort of the changes in digital technology and whatever. And not only was that from a consumer standpoint, but from a business standpoint. And so they had exploited all of this content. They'd put all of these tracks out on iTunes, but didn't really have a clear methodology on how they were going to pay people for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my first job at Sony was being hired as a temp to go through and make sure that the songwriters on all of the songs on all of the individual iTunes downloads got paid.
Sure.
And so I was like, oh, that's great. That's something I don't have to think about. I can just put on some headphones. They give me a spreadsheet every day. I just get on a computer, match some vendor to what they call an ISRC code. I won't tell you what all those things mean.
Yeah, no, I know what those are.
Yeah. And, I thought that was that. But then the more that I started doing it and the more that I started learning about that side of the industry, I totally fell in love with the work, and not just the spreadsheets, but sort of everything around rights management and things like that. And so that started my trajectory at Sony. And so I started as a temp and then ended up being a director of the department.
Because you were there like for years.
For years, yeah. So I was there from 2006 And then we moved to Des Moines in 2015. So what is that? 9 years, I guess.
Yeah.
And then worked remotely for a number of years after moving to Des Moines.
Right.
Doing that stuff. So.
And you got to Des Moines because Des Moines was just a safe place to raise your family.
Yeah, weirdly enough, yeah.
Yeah.
It was, as I was telling you as we were walking up the stairs, in 2012, my wife and I had decided that we needed to leave New York City, basically because of our kids. We both.
Which part of the city were you guys living in?
We were in Brooklyn, Flatbush.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hell's Kitchen.
And we were, it's like both of our boys are like, they're super hyper kids, and our older son has some kind of sensitivities, and being in New York City is really hard for a kid that doesn't do well with stimulation.
Well, the public school system there is just not the best.
Yeah.
God bless them, but they're not the best.
It's not the best. And my wife and I actually, we very much believe in the public school system. My wife is a social worker by trade, and so we were like, starting to face that crossroad as our older son was getting, he was heading into middle school, like he was in like 4th grade, I think at the time. And we were like, okay, if we don't make a shift soon, we're either going to have to put him in private school to get the support that he needs, or we need to go someplace where, there's a solid public school system. Mm-hmm. And we were like, no offense to anybody that goes to private school, but, our beliefs are that our country needs a strong public school system. And so we're like, let's go and find some place that we can do that with a better quality of life, lower cost of living, all of these other things. And so.
And Des Moines, Iowa.
Iowa just kind of emerged out of nowhere.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy that Iowa offers that.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it continues to do so.
Yeah.
And so 2012, at that time, as gay marriage wasn't legal everywhere, and we were trying to make the decision of where we wanted to go. And we said, okay, someplace where we can still be legally married and someplace where we have family. And my wife's sister is a professor at Drake University. Mm-hmm. I always say this to people in Des Moines because they're like, oh, you know her? Jennifer Harvey. I don't know if that rings a bell at all, but she's look her up. She's also a person you should interview. She's just phenomenal.
What does she do at the school?
Well, she started as a professor of religion and ethics. Okay. She's a big old queer too. An ordained Baptist minister.
Dope.
And is heavily involved in racial justice work, anti-racism. She wrote a book called Raising White Kids, which is basically about how white people should raise white kids to understand, to basically be anti-racist. And it's just phenomenal. Go look her up. I'll connect you guys. It's
dope.
Yeah,
okay.
Worth the conversation. Yeah. Anyway. It usually buys me a little bit more cred to be like Jen Harvey's my sister-in-law, but
I'm not from here, so I don't get those things.
The Drake students will know.
Yeah, I'll ask Liz.
Yeah. And so anyway, Jen was here and she was like, you guys should really come here. It's great, and it's this little liberal bastion in the middle of the Midwest, and it's really
true. It is true.
And. So I was like, hell no, I'm not moving to Des Moines, Iowa. All they have is corn and soybeans.
Yes.
Also sort of true.
Yeah.
But,
and
bacon. Lots of,
lots of bacon. Lots of pork.
Bacon, lots of pork.
Yeah.
On a stick usually.
Everything's on a stick here.
But so at that time I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And, my wife was like, no, we should really give it a try. And so I started in 2012. I was like, listen, the main thing to me is that there has to be a strong art and culture scene there, because otherwise I can't go. If I can't go to a town and find people that I can play music with, that would be the death of me. And,
Correct.
Of course I had the New Yorkers mentality of there's nothing there. People don't play music in Des Moines, Iowa. What are you talking about?
They just grow corn.
They just grow corn, right?
It's all farmers.
And so I was like, okay, I looked up some things on the internet and I found out about the Des Moines Music Coalition, and there was an attorney guy that worked in, identified himself as an entertainment attorney, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. And then I was reading about the Des Moines Social Club and had found out that Zach Mannheimer, who was the then executive director of the Des Moines Social Club, he had come from New York, and was singing all these praises about he was driving around the country and he stopped in Des Moines and just totally fell in love with the place. And I was like, I have to go talk to that guy, because if he can make a life there, he's got to have some advice for me. And so I got in touch with all of these folks. I reached out to like the Des Moines Music Coalition, and they were like, oh, lo and behold, we're doing this thing. It's Music University. And, it's where we teach our local artists about the music industry. And, you work for this major label. Do you want to come and talk about what you do? And so I was like, yeah, great. So they paid for me to come. I was like, that's awesome. Got here and was a part of that conference and was like, oh my goodness, this is the coolest thing. Like, I've always been such a community-oriented person. And to be in a place where the entire local music ecosystem came together in support of its local scene to talk about ways that they can improve it was such a vast difference from what I was experiencing in New York. I was like, this is like a utopia.
Well, I would think like, I lived on the West Coast and the East Coast, right? I think the East Coast just has that very individualized mentality.
Yeah, no, totally. And for what it's worth, everybody's there trying to do their hustle and,
It's a rat race.
It is. And, you never have time, you never have energy, you never, it's like you're working a gajillion hours and then you're trying to do your art on the side and any crumb of sort of, press or anything, everybody's kind of, and it's not that people aren't supportive of each other, but everybody's trying to do their own thing. Right. That, there's not a lot of community, at least in my experience. There was a little bit of it. I would say
that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. And then to come here and see such a community and all these people coming together. And I was like, this is so cool.
Well, you have community and support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's one thing if you have a community of creatives. Yeah. Right. But do they really support you?
Right, exactly.
Or are they just saying
they'd support you? Yeah. Right. No, and what it seemed like to me with the Music Coalition is that they were also like putting something behind it. So it's not just like, we're this like really great creative community, but they were actually putting something behind their words and giving education and doing like really, really cool stuff. And so I was so impressed with that. And then that night I went, they had this like after party thing at Gaslamp.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so
R.I.P. Gaslamp.
I know. Not quite yet. They still go to Gaslamp until they're closed. Support them, support the local music, support all the folks that are performing there because it's so important and it's so sad that we're losing another venue in the city.
Hopefully they'll be able to repurpose themselves. And
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. It's so needed, Yeah. But anyway, so we went to Gaslamp and, again, I wasn't expecting much. It was like, okay, well, we're going to go see now all these locals that are kind of talking to each other about how to, make their scene better. The music's probably not going to be that good. It's going to be like some sort of, backroom bar band from like my hometown type of thing. But I went and ironically, it turned out that, I don't know if you're familiar with Dustin Smith, but Dustin Smith happened to be performing that night. And even on top of that, which made it even a little bit more special, which I didn't know this is, imagine me coming to Des Moines. I'd probably been to Iowa maybe 3 other times prior to that. Didn't really know much.
Yeah.
And so this guy comes in, he's dressed in a tuxedo. Everybody in the band is like dressed super nice. And so from my New York perspective, I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like these guys come in and they like actually dress up to do the shows. I didn't think that they did that in the Midwest,
Sure.
So he's coming in this tuxedo. He does this set, totally blown away. Well, I found out that typically he's just usually like in his flannel and a baseball cap, but he just happened to come from a wedding that night.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but it totally fit the vibe. Like, he's got that whole sort of like soulful thing in that particular group that he was doing. But anyway, totally blown away. Talked a ton to the different musicians that were there. And from that point on, I was like, there's something really special about this place. And then so the next morning, also, it's so funny sort of how Des Moines kind of set itself up because the next morning I went to meet with Zach and have coffee to talk about like, okay, well, you're an ex-New Yorker. You came here, you've done something.
Tell me everything you know.
Yeah. In the meantime, though, I'm looking around and I'm seeing like all these people running everywhere and everyone looks so fit. And like, it was like, man, people in Des Moines are like so super fit. I wouldn't have thought that. Like, turned out it was Relays weekend. Which I didn't know. So I was also,
relays,
So I was like, okay, there's also all of these other people. It's like, yeah, it's like, this doesn't seem like very Midwest at all. It was because everybody had flown in and whatever, but I'll set that aside. Anyway, went to talk with Zach and, he's like, Des Moines are really great. And I said, well, as a New Yorker, like what drew you here? And the thing that he told me was that, Des Moines is one of those rare places that if there's anything that you want to do, you can do it and you'll find support from the community to help you do it. And
I'd say that's super accurate.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And he was like, what do you want to do? And from all of the time that I'd spent at Sony one of the things that really struck me was like how much musicians didn't know about the music industry, and particularly about the area of the music industry that I worked in, which was copyright, publishing, all of that kind of stuff. And so a large part of what my team did at Sony was that, you know, somebody would come in, they'd lay down like a verse on somebody's record, they'd leave and not realize like they were stoked just to be on, you know, someone's record. They didn't realize that they had actually contributed to the writing of a song, and so there's royalties associated with that they, you know, so my team would spend so much time just going to track these people down, right?
Yeah.
And there's no need for that. Like, we need to educate musicians. Musicians need to look at their work and their art as a business as well. And, you know, if we can find some way to better educate them about the industry, then they can make much smarter choices about
well, it's a service that they offered.
Right.
That they should have gotten paid for.
Right.
And then continue to get paid for, because music is like film. It never goes away.
Exactly. And so many artists don't think about those things, you know, and again too, and so much has radically changed in the, you know, almost 10 years since I had that conversation with Zach. Actually, it's not quite 10 years, 7 years, but, actually it was 10 years because it was 2012, 2013, around that time. So anyway, and I said, so what I would really love to do, and at that time too, the industry on the major label level was really sort of making this chase. It's like, that was kind of the dawning of YouTube and stuff too. It was like pre-massive social media, and YouTube was like kind of the biggest sort of streaming service. And so a large part of the job that I was doing was like, our labels would go out and they would sign these YouTube sensations. My team's job was to go out and find out, like, did you actually write your songs? Did, you know, who contributed to these things? The fact checking part, right?
Which now today it's still YouTube, but now it's TikTok.
And you know, and any number of different things that are, you know,
so many channels.
Many things. But what had happened was that there seemed to be less emphasis on artist development. It was like, hey, we already know that this stuff is streaming, it's making money, let's go sign it. And it was like an acquisitions game.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the old idea of developing an artist, letting them grow on a label, letting them sort of find their footing was gone. And so those two things combined led me to, in this conversation with Zach, say, you know, I'd really love to start a nonprofit record label, like something that focused on artist development, artist education, and didn't have to look at profit as sort of the indicator of success, that we could look at something else, and we could help, you know, artists in the region build a platform for themselves, become educated. So at the, you know, once they got to the level where major labels were interested in them, or maybe they got the big, you know, YouTube streaming track or whatever, that they went viral, then they could know how to handle themselves, and they would know sort of all the ins and outs of the industry, and could make really informed decisions about how they were to move forward. And if that never happened, at least they would have some resource locally that was helping them learn the industry, become better at what they did, and to actually make their career their art, you know? And so I, you know, was telling him all about this, and he was like, well, if you write up a plan, I'll help you fund it. And that was the beginning of Station One Records. Yeah. Which was, so there's this whole sort of artist entrepreneurship piece of it, but then the other part of it, what I had come to realize and become so in love and enthralled with sort of the community of Des Moines, was also understanding that there are a lot of business folks that feel like, you know, there are tons of students that are at, you know, Drake and Grandview and Des Moines Community College who are interested in working in the music business, and they feel like they need to go to New York, LA, Chicago, Nashville.
That's the one thing that I always butt up against. I want to do film, but I feel like I need to go to LA or New York, right, or Chicago. I'm like, why?
Yeah. Do it here. You can do it here.
Yeah.
For much cheaper, and you have a better quality of life. You know, and I can get into all of the reasons why somebody, you know, there's an artist that I manage who actually just moved to New York City like 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
And I know all the reasons why she did it, and you know, it's like she's also 25, and it's like this is where she grew up.
She wants to have that experience.
Yeah, and it's like,
and that's fine. But I always tell them, in 10 or 15 years, you'll probably call me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm now at that brink of, you know, because like these were kids that I was having these conversations with in 2010, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, they're like, I need to do film. Why?
Yeah.
Because it's in their head.
Right.
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 And now, because I do commercial work, you know, they're like, yo, JK. I'm like, yeah, the film world ain't that pretty, is it?
Yeah. Well, and it's like the difference of, and it, you know, this is the kind of struggle that I've had throughout my lifetime too, as a person who's a musician at heart.
True.
Is, you know, is it sort of like fame and accolades that you're looking for, or do you just actually want to work in the industry that you're passionate about, right? So like, if you're passionate about film, is it so bad to have a job where you're making commercials? You're still working in a visual medium. You don't have to think about a commercial.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, Toby, I think it's this idea, this notion in their head. It's the glitz and the glamour that they think that it is, and there's been tons of people that I've met, and I'm sure you're the same way. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and if you ain't got that killer mentality, you will get killed in the process.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And end up hating people in the process.
Fuck
because,
yeah.
You know, because people are not really that nice generally.
They're not nice in the creative industry.
Yeah.
They are not, like, you'll find some nice people, and those are the people you need to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a big chunk of the industry will chew you up and spit you out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And will do it to the next person and not blink twice.
No, totally. And that's exactly what I fell in love with here, is because it didn't seem like there was that sort of competitive nature. It was like everybody trying to help everybody out. And that's always been the philosophy that I've worked from, in any sort of endeavor that I've done. Let me circle back around to like the Station One thing, because that actually leads into XBK and what we did. But so we started Station One, and so, you know, it was the primary purpose was to be of service to the artists that we were working with, but the idea about people wanting to work in the music industry but feeling like they had to go to other cities. And so
you created this avenue for them.
Right. But I also thought about, you know, there's also professionals like myself who were working in the industry on the, you know, sort of label side, and to get sort of the industry experience as a business person as opposed to a performer.
Sure.
So reached out to Drake and said, listen, this is the thing that we want to do. Like, this could be a really cool sort of public-private partnership where students can actually get real world hands-on experience working for a record label.
Okay.
And so we partnered with Drake. We built in this whole sort of academic component to the work that was happening. And so became an adjunct at Drake, teaching music business courses, bringing those students into Station One. So the students would sort of oversee all the work that was happening and help the artists. And so you had these artists and these students working together and learning together. And so it was a really cool kind of laboratory space. Yeah. And through that, I started working more with artists in the live space here in Des Moines. And one of the things that at this time, and keep in mind, this is 2016, 2017, probably around that time, seeing what the live music landscape looked like in the city. And there was, you know, Woolies, there was Vaudeville Muse. At the time, Lefties had just opened. And I know that there's a whole history before all of that that was here that I wasn't terribly familiar with. But what I do know is that there were a ton of people who were sort of doing a lot of grassroots work to build a live music scene in the city. And when you're working from nothing and trying to build something, you do it in whatever scrappy ways that you can. And so there were, you know, basically a lot of venues that were people who found a place where they could have live music, gather people together, and, you know, just put in a sound system and a stage, and, you know, they could get bands to come through and tour, and it worked. And, you know, it was more about like, we just have to build something so we can get touring bands to come through. And it wasn't so much thinking about the experience. It was about like, we just want to build a scene. We want more music to come into the city. And so by the time that I got here, that part had sort of been established. Like, touring bands were coming through pretty regularly. There were folks like Sam Summers who were promoting, you know, really big shows here. And, you know, Hinterland was just starting. Like, things were really starting to kick up. And it seemed like it was ripe for the time then for a space that could come along and think like, okay, well, we don't have to be as scrappy anymore. Like, there's now a live music audience in the city. People are used to being able to look in the, you know, newspaper or look online and say like, oh, I want to go see a band tonight. There's any number of places that you could go. Yeah. But how can we make that experience and elevate that experience to another level? And so And also continuing to think back about the artists, because again, as I said, I'm a musician by nature, and being, a Black queer woman who is not terribly sort of, pretty gender ambiguous. It has not always been easy to tour across the country, and being in a lot of venues where it's incredibly male dominated. And so anyway, fast forward, I wanted to build a space that I felt safe performing in, and thinking about building a venue from the perspective of a performer, and being sort of, as I was saying, that the concept of being at service to the artists, and not only for national artists that we're touring, but also for the artists that were in our own community. And so that was the beginning of XBK.
Yeah.
And
which is in the Drake neighborhood. And it seats about what?
250.
Yeah.
250 people. We primarily focus on national touring acts.
Sure.
But we also really pride ourselves on customer service, and again, I hate using the term safe space, because no space can ever really be safe.
But being a queer, multiracial person, you offer that avenue.
Well, one of the best stories from a performer that I had ever heard, and it was so great, is this artist. She's actually from Minneapolis, Chastity Brown.
Okay.
She came into town and she said, I didn't know anything about this venue. I was really scared because the last time I came to perform in Iowa, and I won't say what town it was in or where it was, but she said, she's a Black woman, said she got out of the car, and the person that greeted her was just like, you need to be careful here. And she was totally terrified, and that was her experience of Iowa.
Sure.
And she was like, I walked into this venue, I saw you, and I was able to take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And that means something. That means something to people, that you can come in and you can see. I mean, and granted, our staff we strive to be diverse. It's most of the staff, the club, are women, or identify as women. We have people of color on the staff. Cis white men are of the minority, which I am very proud of.
Yeah. Considering Iowa's like what, 92% white?
Yeah. And it's, and people feel that. They come into the space and they feel that it's a place that you can be who you are. And it's not just about people who seem to be sort of outside the quote unquote norm. It's also the kind of place where we value a diversity of thought, and
well, it's something that I think truthfully you just don't see in Des Moines, Iowa.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like when you come to spaces like yours and you're like, holy shit, like, okay, like it's like places that you would see like in, LA, New York, Atlanta, Minneapolis, even Minneapolis, right?
Yeah.
But in little old Des Moines, Iowa, there's a space like that exists that's ran by a non-white person.
Yeah. And, the irony, we were talking about the National Independent Venue Association before we started recording.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned through participating in this organization is that there are not many me's in this industry.
You're a unicorn, my friend.
Yeah. And it didn't ever occur to me really that was the case, but like,
I think it's because you spent so many years putting your nose to the grind and gritting it out, right? And just doing your job and
you just do the work.
Right? And so now that you are in a completely different space in your life, you sit back and you look at it and you're like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, it's, being a promoter, it is, very cis men, white men. And, finding women in the industry who own venues or who are sort of, own their own companies is there's not many. I mean, the ones who are in it are bosses to the nth degree,
Sure.
And Neva, ironically, the president of the organization is a woman.
Yes.
And she's like incredible.
What, Diane?
Dana Frank.
Dana
Speaking
Frank.
of Minneapolis, she owns like First Avenue and is that promoter.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, dope. So she's close.
She's close. Yeah. Okay. And, and the weird thing is prior to that, we didn't know each other, and there's not many female promoters in the business, let alone queer female promoters in the business.
True.
And, we didn't even know each other until the pandemic.
And that opened a whole
other sort of realm of things that, give us another 30 minutes and we can talk about. And I know that the light flashed a moment ago.
We have to wrap up.
Yeah.
But XBK is open how many days a week?
We are actually only open when we have shows.
Okay.
So you just kind of have to watch our calendar. I mean, generally we try to have bookings most every night, but we're only open when we have events.
And that's xbk.com, right?
xbklive.com.
Yeah. Okay. I know Tobi answers the emails because I emailed.
Shh. People aren't supposed to know that.
But they are very responsive on their emails. I will 100% vouch on that.
No, awesome.
So you can go to like Facebook, Instagram, and then your website for all the booking information.
All the booking information.
Are you still involved with Station One?
No. So once I started getting so involved with NEVA, and I do tons and tons of work with them, I didn't really have time, and I had spent 5 years really sort of building the organization.
Yeah.
So my business partner, Thomas Coots, actually took it over. So I stare at him across the office, and so I'm tangentially involved, but not in the everyday, day-to-day of it.
For sure. And Station One's website is?
Station1records.com. So it's station, the numeral 1, records.com.
Okay. All right. Well, Tobi, I love for you to come back because, like, I'm telling you guys, we've only just touched the tip of the iceberg. Seriously.
Yeah, no, I would 100% come back, particularly when I'm less tired and can be a little bit more, like, coherent. So.
You're good. I mean, you're a mom, you have kids, you run a business, you also work still for Sony. I mean, you're doing everything that you can.
I am doing many things, but I left New York City and I gained so much of my life back. So
true.
It's like I'm not commuting 4 hours a day. So and I just filled it with things.
Fill it with things that make you happy.
Yeah, totally.
All right, Tobi, I'd love for you to come back. Guys, check out Tobi. Like I showed you, like we just flash everything in here. So like we'll probably, it's a deep dive.
I'm scared.
Yeah, you'll be good. It's all good. All right, gang, check out Tobi, xbklive.com. Please, please, please support the local venues because we really need to keep those going because there's not very many left.
There are not.
Yeah.
Not the small venues for sure. So.
And if you have, do you do parties?
We do. We do parties. We do rentals. We do all kinds of things.
Tobi's your person, gang.
Yeah. Anybody has an interesting, I love doing interesting, unique kind of things. So if you have a weird idea of some type, let me know because I'm going to try and pull it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we out.